Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is issue number 82, Azrael, Jean-Paul Valley. The Jean-Paul Valley, I know a couple of characters have worn the mantle and the name of Azrael, but we are going with the most prominent one, and that is Jean-Paul Valley.
Absolutely.
So, before we get started, this is something that I don't know how much of this is going to end up making the whole episode. Some of this may be Patreon, some of this may be live stream, but last week's episode, I gave a call to action in which I said that people should channel their anger towards productive means and not express it violently. And at the time that I had recorded that, George Floyd was still alive, I believe, and Minneapolis was not burning. And listening to that afterwards, because what I like to do sometimes is I like to take parts of the episodes and, minute segments and parse them out into an audiogram that I post on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and share and say, hey, here's a snippet of our episode. Here's something really good. If you should listen to the rest of this. We're recording this on Saturday, so goodness even knows what's going to happen between now and the day this is released. But listening back to this after everything that transpired, it just kind of hit me how privileged it sounded, how it came across as flat from my perspective. And I acknowledge that the call to action was largely done on the overwhelming majority of instances where you're talking about something small or something personal that affects you, in which you really shouldn't lash out like that over something personal. But when it comes to systemic stuff, when it comes to large scale issues, societal issues, and I've been seeing a lot of stuff posted on social media by a lot of people, and it's really kind of opened my eyes more so towards some people's belief systems. I understand that it reaches a point where being polite isn't enough, where being respectful isn't going to get you anywhere. And in fact, that there are certain segments of the population who hope and who are banking on those impacted individuals and those impacted communities going the respectful route. Because as long as they stay respectful, as long as they continue on that route, they are remaining compliant. And that's all they care about. Because it's not about the human impact. It's about the economic impact. It's about so much more than that. And so there comes a time when being respectful and being polite doesn't work. And I don't know just how far, just exactly where that line is, but it's not for me to say, and it's not for me to claim that we're still on one side of the line or the other. But I do acknowledge that there is a line, and that it's up to those communities that are impacted to determine where that line is and how far they feel they've been pushed. So it's just something that I was thinking about in listening to that bit from last episode, that the call to action may work on an individual level, on a small scale, but that while no one is saying that riots should be your first response to something, sometimes it's all you have left. because I'm not trying to make light of the situation or anything, but I'm going to paraphrase Chris Rock and say, I'm not saying they should riot, but I understand, because I get it that if you're pushed beyond the point where peaceful protesting does anything, people are paying attention and it's getting eyes on things. And listen, property can be replaced. You can fix broken glass. You can buy a new toaster. You can repair bricks. George Floyd isn't coming back. Ahmaud Arbery isn't coming back. Trayvon Martin, I could spend the next 15 minutes going down names. They're not coming back. And if you're focused on the value of the property that's being destroyed rather than the lives that have been lost, then you need to really rethink where your soul is and what value you have to humanity. Because if that's your first response, then I don't think you have value. And I'm just going to say that. And this is me speaking as a white man. It hurts me. It hurts me as a white man, and it hurts me as a human to see this happening. And I know we try not to get into politics on this show, but God damn it, this is wrong. There's just no other way about it. And I can't stay silent anymore. Not that I was ever really silent, but I was trying not to bring it to the show. But I just feel like, in light of what I said last week,
I will be brief. Because if you're willing to say that from a systemic level, then I will do what I know, which is to bring it to a personal level. Up until this point, you and my wife are the only people that knew this, but I'll go ahead and I'll bring it. I'll just breach this point. So don't get me wrong. I live my life usually without much fear. I don't worry about things, but yeah, for some reason, I think it's systemic. I think it's something that is at this point ingrained in my DNA. And no, I'm not pretending and trying to use a medical degree with that. I'm just saying that there's a segment of our population that understands what I'm about to point out. So I've never had at least any signs of I think, acute stress or PTSD or anything of the sort. And yet, after watching a video of a man gunned down in a neighborhood and having a random dream of someone having a nightstick to my neck saying, "Have you ever been this scared?" and them having a uniform arm, and having my wife wake me up telling me that I was clawing off the bed saying, "No, no, no," screaming, tears coming down my face. And then recognizing I don't need psychoanalysis for that to know what that meant. And being totally fine. That was a one-time thing. And then foolishly watching a video of a man with I'm not even going to describe it again. Because the point is, when I watched the video, that's when I broke down crying, right? And this was all just yesterday that this happened to me. So my point is, I've been incredibly privileged in my life. I'll never claim to say that I was severely disadvantaged or anything of the sort. And yet that fear is that far ingrained in me. Instantly, automatically. And that type of emotional reaction happens without any forethought on my part. As someone who I consider myself, quote unquote, an intellectual. That tells me that there's something deeper. And I'll admit, that's my own thing to work on. I'm not claiming that it's anyone else's. But I also know that I'm not alone. And so I'm not trying to tell anybody what the right thing is or anything of the sort. I'm saying, though, that whatever emotion that you're feeling about it, if you needed to hear that someone else is going through it, and I know for a fact that other Black psychiatrists are going through it, right now we're just trying to stick together. And literally, it feels like we're trying to survive. Okay, I'll stop that because I'm really, really excited about this episode. I'm excited about this character. I want to get into that.
Yeah. I think it needed to be said in light of everything that's transpired over the last week. Like I said, since we recorded last, there's so much that's happened. And it just needed to be said. We're gonna try and switch gears and hopefully bring you the remainder of an episode that is as entertaining and informative as they usually are, to whatever extent that may be. But we have to acknowledge the reality of the situation. So, just need to take a breath there. Jean-Paul Valley, created by Denny O'Neill, Joe Quesada, Grant Morrison, and an uncredited Peter Milligan in Batman Sword of Azrael #1, October of 1992. By the way, that is a huge list of names right there. Quesada, very early on in his career. Grant Morrison, still fairly early in his career, but working with a legend like Denny O'Neill, who is just so linked to Batman for so many years. The Dennis O'Neill and Neil Adams pair, just for DC, they were just gold. There's some big names that were brought on board to create this character. Jean-Paul Valley is a computer science student in Gotham City who discovers his father was an assassin for a secret religious society called the Order of Saint Dumas, and that he is next in line. And he finds this because his father shows up at his apartment dying. And so this is the point in which his conditioning that he had unknowingly been put through kicks in. And so he now is the new assassin for the Order, and he was sent to kill Carlton LeHah, who is the man who had murdered his father. And in so doing, he crosses paths with Batman. And long story short, he ends up saving Bruce and overriding his conditioning, becoming his own man, because his conditioning instructed him to seek vengeance and show no mercy. And instead, he helps Bruce, who had been trying to also investigate the murder of his father. And so Jean-Paul joins WayneTech, and then after Bruce is paralyzed by Bane, and for more on that, you can listen to our Bane episode, Jean-Paul takes over as Batman. Not Robin, by the way, not Tim Drake, who was operating as Robin at the time. No, Jean-Paul is the one who takes over as Batman. Well, I don't know if I want to call that a mistake on Bruce's part, but it certainly didn't go the way that he had initially anticipated, because Jean-Paul operates way more ruthlessly than Bruce ever did. It's a combination of his conditioning and his overall just general belief that Bruce is far too lenient on criminals. And after Jean-Paul ends up killing one villain, Abattoir, and this also results in the death of one of his hostages, because Jean-Paul killed him before he could rescue the hostage, and the hostage ends up dying. Bruce says, okay, Jean-Paul is going too far. He rehabilitates himself, and he battles Jean-Paul, finally winning after snapping Azrael out of his deluded state. But Bruce kind of takes pity on him. He realizes, listen, this wasn't entirely your fault. You were screwed up well before I gave you the mantle of Batman. And
Isn't
so it gives him.
I mean, that's kind of pot calling the kettle black, huh? Just saying.
So, yeah, I guess you could say that's sort of hypocritical, but in any case, so Bruce gives him a sum of money and says, go find out where you came from, because I think if you figure that out, it will help you resolve those issues and become a better person. Because Bruce knows Jean-Paul isn't a bad guy. He was not really dealt a good hand when it came to coping mechanisms. So Jean-Paul ends up discovering that he was a test tube baby whose DNA was spliced with animals.
That's not how that works.
Because comics.
Thank you.
So he ends up working to regain Bruce's trust, which he does after saving several U.S. senators. Not going to get into that.
Yeah. I'm leaving that hanging. I'm sorry.
Yep. Now I'll leave that like a hanging Chad. So he ends up being killed while battling his father's murder because, surprise, Carlton LeHah is still alive. And so then he's later revived as part of the Black Lantern Corps. Then in the New 52, we discover that Jean-Paul Valley was cloned by his father as the newest member of the Order of Saint Dumas. Then he was sent to battle Bane on Santa Prisca, where he encountered Red Robin, Tim Drake, and Red Hood, Jason Todd. And he began to question the Order and what his conditioning was, what his conditioning meant. And then he joins the Bat family. So his conditioning then returns, and Bruce and the rest of the Bat family were forced to battle him. And then Bruce helps create a suit that would allow Jean-Paul to stay in control of his conditioning. And then he ends up becoming a member of Justice League Odyssey. So interesting character, and there's a lot going on there. So the first issue that we're going to discuss, there's really only two major issues that we were able to sort of come up with for Jean-Paul. The first order is the struggling with his conditioning. This is the ultimate nature versus nurture argument because, he was literally bred in a test tube, and then he was subjected to copious amounts of conditioning. So, it wasn't that, we just talked about Laura Kinney and all of her conditioning and the trigger scent and everything. This is another perfect example of that. Jean-Paul is very much like X-23, from 2 weeks ago, where he was bred and raised to be a certain way. The only difference, I think, with him and Laura is that Jean-Paul was only supposed to do these things under certain circumstances. Mm-hmm. And otherwise, he was just operating as just a regular person, whereas Laura was intentionally raised to have zero humanity to her whatsoever. So I think there's a key distinction there, but the end result still ends up being very, very similar. So, Doc, I'll let you take it away.
Sure. So you already pointed out nature versus nurture. As always, why not both? In this case, though, I'll bring it back to what we all can experience as human beings. When we're saying nature, we're referring to the idea that you have the genetic material from two parents that combine to give you all of the traits that you're ever going to have in your life, and then how everything outside of that pure process ends up influencing you. Well, there is a time period where, I'm not talking about gene splicing or any other gobbledygook that people like to think of. I'm saying that even as early as, quote unquote, a test tube, the environment can be manipulated to the point of influencing the original genetic material. And so if we're talking about someone that's still in the uterus, you have external influences. How many mothers play classical music or whatever music they want and notice the unborn baby's reaction? How many people have the tales of, oh, wow, mom has indigestion, therefore that means the child has a lot of hair. We make all of these connections the second after, quote unquote, nature is supposed to have had its role. And so...
Well, I do just want to point out that the indigestion tying in with babies having hair actually has some basis in scientific fact.
I wasn't claiming that it's totally false. I'm just saying we've been making these types of connections for the longest time. Like, we know this. This is not something that is a completely novel idea. That's all. That's all I was getting at.
Okay, no, because I was just going to say, because Kat, my wife, had copious amounts of indigestion throughout the vast majority of her pregnancy with our son, and the kid comes out and he's got a full head of hair. At this point, the kid has more hair than I do. Not that that's much of a bar to clear, but he was just born with a full head of hair. But it's something about the hormone that it involves hair growth that does something to your system. But sorry for...
No, it's not a derail. It's exactly on point, because what I was getting at is this happens so early that things that we don't even take into consideration are going to influence what that person is going to end up doing throughout their life. And the good news is it's still incredibly malleable no matter what. But the bad news is the earlier you start and the more consistent that influence is, then the more rigid it's going to become in a relatively short period of time. In other words, if it's haphazard and there is no one particular pattern, then you may not get such a rigid personality when it comes to what's going on. If it's consistent, intentional, with the backing of the parents and any other person that is interacting with them, and is in an environment that is not changing. So I think that describes everything that Jean Paul was going through. His father had a single purpose determined, and everyone knew that that would be a benefit in theory to an offspring. They made sure that he was in that proper circumstance. They made sure that he would end up exposing him to the ideas that they thought were most appropriate for their society, and did it unwavering. That sounds like a pretty good recipe to get exactly what you want. And of course, you mentioned the difference being it's only supposed to be in specific circumstances. That reminds me of the idea of what you do in the house versus what you do in the hood. I mean, just saying what you do with everyone else versus how your parents expect you. And depending on who you're hanging out with, whether it was intentional or not, they may get those stories later on from the school or it's amazing how people seem to turn on and turn off what it is that they do the second that they know they're supposed to go over their friend's house and they know what the rules are. So when you mention that Jean Paul seemed to be living this typical life, lots of people do that. And I like to point out that it doesn't have to be a bad thing. I don't want to make it claim that this is terrible if you have such strong goals. Like if you're one of those parents that made sure that your children knew how to play piano by the time they were 3 years old, I'm not shaming you. That's fine. My point is that if they get exposed to other things and everyone else around them starts saying things like, wow, dude, man, you're really focused on that piano. Don't you do anything else? And that's their peers talking. Then they may develop this idea that, okay, I'll make sure that I do everything my parents say, and or however it is that they're supposed to want it, and I'll make them proud. But anywhere else, I know I got to turn that off, or I got to tone it down. So they learn how to kind of live a double life. Not everyone, but in the case of Jean Paul, it wasn't even intentional. It was unconscious, and we'll definitely get into that. We're gonna have some fun with that. But the way it's portrayed in the comics, it's really extreme. He pretty much starts hallucinating when all this stuff starts coming out, and he doesn't know why. He doesn't know exactly how he's supposed to control it, but he does notice that when he does what this image tells him to do, that darn it, it's productive, and in a perverse way it feels good. And so that's how deep this sort of thing can go. It doesn't have to be as dramatic as hallucinating, but it really can be that powerful. So there's all sorts of variations on this. I'm just picking a couple to give examples. I'm sure everyone that's listening to this can think of their own. It doesn't have to be as extreme as what we're describing with Jean Paul. Hint, hint, segue.
All right. Yeah, I do like the example of doing one thing at your parents' house, another thing at your friend's house, unless you know that your friend's parents are going to tell your parents what you were up to at their house, and that you're not going to be able to get away with anything because they'll just put in a call and you go, you know what your boy was doing in my house? You come up in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the downside to having parents who are friendly with each other. You got to be friends with the kids, but not have the parents be friends with each other, and then you can get away with stuff. I say that like we were bad kids in high school.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say, ironically, that doesn't really pertain to us. Our parents got along great.
No, our parents got along great, and we weren't doing anything, aside from maybe being too loud. But
yes,
we were going to be loud no matter where we were.
That's right.
We're still loud. So the other issue that Jean Paul has is this notion that extremism is the way to go. And Not entirely certain how much of that is a result of the order and how much of that is just his innate personality, but this belief that mercy is weakness. And we see that specifically when he takes over the role of Batman, that he sees Bruce being lenient with these criminals and saying, well, you let them live. You need to be harsher on them because that's the only way they're going to learn. Very, very hard, very paternalistic. And that doesn't really bode well for him. And it's one of the main reasons that Bruce comes back, is because he says that this is not who Batman is. Batman should not be this way. So that's the other primary thing for Azrael. So I'll let you talk about that, Doc.
Well, when it comes to Jean-Paul and the idea that, as you say, mercy is weakness, I think the idea is that wrongs need to be corrected, and they need to be corrected immediately. There is no chance for nuance. There's not even a chance for forgiveness. It's a one-shot deal. And so with that idea in mind, yeah, you're not going to operate the same way that Bruce operates as Batman. As a matter of fact, when he takes up the mantle, he really struggles with the idea of how to investigate things. And he says, well, what would Bruce do? And the idea of, for example, I remember this specifically, triangulation, how to track someone down, because his idea was, if I see a crime or if I see something that is wrong, then I'll simply correct it and I'll just keep beating people down. And eventually I'll find who I need to find, as opposed to thinking beyond that. So in a way, it creates I'm going to reference someone named Jocko Willink, who's a former Navy SEAL, the idea that discipline is freedom, where if you set things up so well that you don't have to create decision fatigue for yourself, then life in many ways becomes simpler. It becomes efficient. And as you said, maybe that's because of the order itself, because there's many times where spirituality and organized religion encourages that type of personal traits. I don't want to make that sound negative, because I'm not against religion. That's not my point. I'm just saying that there are certain ways that can be enhanced that many other parts of society don't even pay attention to. But Jean-Paul was set up for that. So if you know that you have a set of tenets that make things absolutely against your beliefs, and you have a way to eliminate the opposition to those beliefs, then, oh, I'm sorry, I need to add, you also have the means to eliminate those who have those beliefs, then yeah, you might just go ahead and act on it. And that's where the danger happens, because there's no negotiation. There's no rationing. So you can't talk him out of it. If you did something wrong, you're going to pay. And as we have seen, you may pay with your life. So the unfortunate part of that is it works both ways, because the way that Batman was able to combat this was to just go ahead and fight him head on once he realized he couldn't do it. He couldn't reach him. And it's a great set of panels where Bruce points out he has a memory from his childhood of how this all got found. And it's basically a hole that he hid in. And at that point, Azrael, Jean-Paul, is hunting him down. But the hole is so small that he has to take off his armor. He has to take off his suit. He has to remove everything. And as he's doing it, as he's taking off that mantle, as he's removing all of those constraints that he has established for himself and that rigid mindset, that's when he breaks down. That's when, Forget about whether or not it's Mercy being weak or whatever. It was simply, I don't have what I thought I did, and I don't know what to do. And that's where Bruce was able to reach out to him. So from that standpoint, if your system is so rigid that the first time anyone actually brings, whether it's an argument or an actual fight, and they're quote unquote winning, then I think I've described this before. It's like a glass cannon. It just completely shatters. It doesn't just kind of go away. That person's identity is eliminated, and they can go into complete despair. So for as strong as that stance may make someone, it means that they have the ultimate vulnerability if it ever comes out. So just be very careful. If you ever find yourself in a position where you're wondering, why is it that I'm always right and everyone else is so wrong, then it might be a little scary, but you may need to question that just a little bit. Not even saying you have to change your mind, but it's okay just to poke at it just enough so that you get a little bit of expansion in your personality, in your emotions, and in your thought process.
Wow. Very powerful stuff. Low-key powerful, but I think it's very worth listening to. And maybe if you find that it's impacted your life, go back and listen to it again. Just, hit the rewind button, go a couple of times, go back and re-listen to that last part over and over again. Because Lord knows I do. Sometimes I need that reminder of just not to that extent, but just the notion of re-examining why certain things hit me the way that they do and why I have certain reactions to certain external stimuli, and then go, why is this impacting me the way that it is? And then the deeper I dig, I go, oh, okay. Because it's never just the singular incident, or you may start to recognize that, oh, and that's why the last time something like this happened, and then the other time that this happened, and then the other time that this happened. And so you start to recognize the patterns. And pattern recognition is incredibly important for self-awareness and for growth and maturity. And I think that's something that Jean-Paul was denied. I think he was taught to recognize patterns in others as part of his conditioning so that he could be an effective assassin, but he was never taught how to recognize patterns in himself. And as he starts to do that, as you said, is when he starts to break down and realize, oh, okay, these are all the things that were instilled in me, and that's why I'm having these reactions now. If I recognize the pattern, then I can break it or I can change it, and then I can grow. So that's a call to action maybe for this week, is recognize your own patterns and see if there's something that you've noticed leads to a recurring negative result or a particularly emotional result. Start to think about what those triggers are, see if there's a pattern to them. And then from there, you can start to shift the pattern. It's not, as we always say, it's not going to be a switch. It's not going to happen overnight. But if you can start to recognize the patterns, you can start to change them. But you can't change the pattern until you see it, until you recognize it. And that's what Jean-Paul needed to do. And that's what he's still working on. It's not perfect. He's working on it, even to this day in comics. But it's a work in progress. We're all work in progress. We're all works in progress.
Well said.
Until we draw our last breath. So on that note, let's take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll get into treatment. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Remember the first time you held a controller? That first cartridge you blew into so you could get that stinking game to work? What about your first comic you read? The first time you saw Star Wars years and years and years ago? Now you're an adult, working full-time to provide for you and your family. But even after all of your hard work, you still make it your quest to spend time with your kids, hoping they find even the slightest interest in some of the things that you had grown up loving. Video games, movies, comics, My Little Ponies. Join me, Kyle Federline, every Wednesday morning on my quest as I discuss with guests what it's like to raise a kid and watch them take after some of our own interests as kids, or have no interest at all in the things that we had grown up loving. This is Parent Quest. Head on over to Anchor and ask me your questions, leave me a voice message, and follow me on Twitter at ParentQuestPod, Instagram and Facebook at ParentQuest.
Do you love movies and psychology?
Do you want to know what it would be like if Batman was in your therapy office?
Listen to our podcast, Popcorn Psychology. 3 therapists dissect blockbuster movies, available everywhere you find podcasts.
Hi, I'm Gail Simone, and you're listening to Capes on the Couch.
Welcome back. So, treatment in universe. I know that, and I didn't mention this during the background portion, but for a time, Jean-Paul was homeless, and he was hanging out with a former psychiatrist whose name was Brian, which I was like, I saw that and I go,
Yeah,
really?
That's real.
Really?
Yep.
That's as inventive a name as you could come up with? Brian? Okay. Seems a little lazy on the writing, but whatever.
Hey, wait. Hold on. If you're going to say that, Kelly, Philip Phillips, it happens, man.
Oh, I know. You know, Bob Roberts. So that being said, what advice would you have for Jean-Paul that was not covered by Brian?
So this is where things get a little dicey, because I have to acknowledge that the quote-unquote conditioning that he had was powerful for a reason. And it wasn't just because he was at his most vulnerable state as an living organism. It's that he appears to respond with incredible enthusiasm to it when it's activated. So that tells me that he responds well to discipline, to order, to the idea of a hierarchy. All of those factors tell me that if you do it in a way that is not so pejorative, that it could have a positive impact on his life. And I would go ahead and I would try and find a way to, this sounds so dicey, structure that within the Bat family. And what I mean by that is you clearly have the highest level, which is Bruce as Batman himself, and maybe just under that is Nightwing, and then you get some of the branches off of that, be it the other Robins, be it the fact that Oracle's involved, all of it. The point is, he needs to know what his place is within that system. And I think if he knew that in a much more structured way, as opposed to, look, we all are doing this, we're all going to get it done. If you need my help, call me. That's too vague for him. And I know Bruce even created the suit, and that's fine because that's the way Bruce deals with everything. He has something for everybody, but that's too simplistic. He likes, this may sound counterintuitive, he likes controlled complexity. That's really what religion is. It's organized complexity. And that doesn't have to be a bad thing. So if it's something that he could latch onto and be that type of, I would almost say like a minister of the night, as opposed to Azrael, that's the avenger of death. Like that's my point. Having just that subtle difference within a much more structured setting, no different than how some people, once again, not trying to be pejorative, the way some people say, well, you know what that kid needs is discipline. He needs to go to the military or go to boarding school. Well, maybe not, but the idea behind it is clear. You need a different structure than what your current environment is giving you. And you need it in a way that's going to allow for a certain amount of growth without being complete chaos. So that's the way I would focus it. whether or not everybody else in the Bat family would see it that way, because as we know, a lot of them are very individualistic and hard-headed. But if I could get the buy-in from them, I think it would work.
Individualistic and hot-headed. See the Jason Todd episode. See the Dick Grayson episode. We haven't done Tim yet, right?
That's true.
Yeah, we didn't do Tim. Ariel hasn't gotten there yet.
Oh. Yeah. And don't forget Damien. Oh.
And Damien, right. I'm sure at some point she's going to go, okay, and now I want an episode on Damien, or now I want an episode on Tim. Now I want an episode on Stephanie Brown. So, but it's interesting, getting back to your point about religion as organized complexity. We're just hitting all the hard-hitting topics now, so let's just go for it. I don't think I've ever heard it so succinctly described as that, as organized complexity. I think that is a very interesting way of putting it, and I never really heard it phrased like that before. And I'm not sure that maybe if it were a non-religious order, it would just been like the Court of Owls or the League of Assassins or something along those lines. If there had not been a religious aspect to it, I wonder how he would have handled the conditioning differently. I wonder if it would have had a slightly different result if you had taken the religious aspect out of it. What it would have done had he been raised as a Talon as opposed to in the Order of Saint Dumas.
Amazing. You know what you just did again? And I know I've done it too. You just gave a great what if to DC.
Okay. I'll take that then. What if Azrael had been a Talon? What if Azrael had been, a disciple of Ra's al Ghul? What if he hadn't been raised as a, religious, the order what if he hadn't been raised in a religious order or trained by a religious order? Okay. Well, it's, usually you're the one who comes up with the what ifs. So I guess I'll take credit for that one. So out of universe then, I guess, would you say maybe an ex-clergyman? Maybe a defrocked priest? Or someone along those lines, someone who maybe became disillusioned with the order and the structure of the religion, somebody who still has some notions of faith or belief in a grander scheme, but doesn't necessarily care for the dogmatic portions of it.
Right.
And who also, may have some daddy issues.
Okay.
I think that would be a good real life corollary, or analog to Jean Paul.
So my first thought with anyone that comes in with that type of circumstance, it's just a colloquialism. I'm not making any dramatic statements here. I want to make sure they're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. As you mentioned, if they still have certain amounts of faith, that's fine. That can be an incredibly positive thing. Does that mean that they are so disillusioned that they think the world itself is not worth what they're doing? Or is it that, as you said, there are certain things that either they experienced within that organization, within that religion, and it doesn't just have to be religion. It can be the idea that you were all in on a certain type of job and you realize that it all seems to run off of fraud and scams. And so now you're a whistleblower. There's so many variations. But the point still stands. You once had a certain way of dealing with your day-to-day life, and it was rewarding for you until you realized that there are one or many parts of it that need to change. You have no idea how to do it. So either you're removing yourself, or when you challenged it, they removed you. So, first of all, whether it was one way or the other, that's rejection, because it's either a rejection of them or a rejection of yourself. If you identify so strongly with what you were doing, then there's a good chance you're going to end up depressed. You've just created uncertainty for yourself, so you just added anxiety. You have changed potentially the fabric of your own reality, which can lead to a lot of other symptoms, including psychotic symptoms. So as much as we do the because comics thing, it's not really that far off in that sense. So where do we go from here? I want to know what they want to keep. And I want them to actually make a list. I want them to create their affirmation. What is it that was the number one thing that you can still hold on to, that you identify with, that you think is worth it in this world? And keep that at the forefront, because everything else can be built around that. It doesn't have to be quote unquote structured the way it was before. But if you start with that as a foundation, then you can get into a lot of the cognitive biases that had developed from the other factors that led you to leave in the first place. And it's really as simple as the cognitive behavioral therapy that we've mentioned before. So you had those antecedents that were drilled into you from the very start about what was right and wrong. And then you developed your own behavior as to how you were going to act it out. And then the people around you, or your own emotions, which is something that people don't recognize, your own emotions are the consequence. So we're starting way from the beginning now. When someone comes in like this, we're pointing out this is square one. So please don't bring me the suppositions. Don't tell me you're on the consequence side and you want to know how the consequences are going to change, because you're not being accurate. You're starting from what on earth are any of these antecedents to begin with? What are your base premises that you don't even know about? This may be something that is possibly susceptible to hypnosis. This is something that may even require, dare I say it, classic psychoanalysis. Because a lot of times psychiatrists were not supposed to say that, but I'm willing to say it. And yes, something this complex will need other tools in the toolbox, and that includes the idea of medication depending on what symptoms are present. So this is an all-hands-on-deck situation, because without that level of intervention, people like this can really become wayward souls. They end up drifting, not just because they want to wander, but because they truly are lost. Sorry, I'm not trying to be so dramatic about all of this, but I can't help it. It's just the way I speak.
Oof. Interesting. Getting back to your point, I don't know that it's necessarily that you're being dramatic. I think you're giving the gravitas necessary to these types of situations. I don't think it's that you're being overly dramatic. I think it's just you're being descriptive. But knowing you as long as I have, I'll chalk that up to personal bias. I don't mind it, but all right. So let's see what all of this is going to lead to when we get Jean-Paul Valley on Dr. Issues' couch.
Hello, Jean-Paul. I'm Dr. Issues.
And good day to you too, Doctor.
Well, you don't have to be so formal. This is a relaxed space.
Well, that's reassuring, but only so far as I can ever truly relax.
So what's the hindrance to a relaxed state of mind for you?
I'm not sure I know what that means. I sleep, I wake up, I go over what happened while I was asleep.
Say again? You mean you go over your dreams?
No, I mean whatever it is that I've designed or accomplished while I'm in an unconscious state. That's the most rewarding part of being relaxed, right?
That's not... that's quite a unique feat. In fact, it sounds more like hypnosis than basic relaxation.
I thought hypnosis is something that only happens if you allow for it. I haven't let anyone do anything to me.
That deep, really?
Certain.
Really?
Why are you repeating that?
Come on, let's have it.
So there may be some parts of my background that I'd rather not talk about with a close-minded stranger.
Well, first of all, I'm not close-minded, but that response tells me it's either traumatic or embarrassing, maybe both. Yeah, look, I don't expect you to tell me everything. Just start what you're comfortable with. You know, your level of dissociation really doesn't happen overnight.
You're not far off. Ever since I've aligned myself with a certain crowd, it does happen overnight. Was that meant to be a joke on your part?
No. Actually, sometimes I end up in a situation where my phrases become puns even when I'm not trying. It's second nature to me at this point. I've been doing it for so long, I don't really know how to turn it off. Speaking of, I'm fascinated by your situation because what you started to describe is a psychological on-off switch. It's not likely that perfect, right? I mean, do you ever regret what you do under those circumstances?
No, as you said, it's not perfect, and I do have regrets. But the good part is that I have it all under control now.
Oh. Well, then I guess I made the mistake. I mean, I didn't specifically ask what troubles you. So, I mean, if what you describe's under control, then what else can we work on?
How do I do it without a suit?
I'm sorry, you lost me.
It's under control because I have armor. I'm a man of unusual means. But I wonder, if I don't have external trinkets, what else can I do? I'm not like them. I can't have a part of me walled off. And I can't kill off a part of me just because they're worried it will kill someone else.
Are you the one trying to make jokes now? Because that was a really circular statement. And, thinking about it, I don't know if I should be tinkering with your external supports if it involves killing.
Why doesn't anyone get this? I just want to be me. Just me. Not a suggested me, not a trained me, not a zealot locked in a brooding cave me, just me.
I can tell you're passionate about this. That's something I can appreciate. Now, okay, let's reset. In your own words, with no assumptions or wit or anything on my part, who are you?
I'm a man of strong convictions. I think the world needs a sense of order that can only be achieved if you're willing to die for what is just. Tradition is a noble cause that society has lost sight of for far too long. Every wrong is a battle worth fighting for.
I'm not trying to change your mind, but
there's always something. You said no judgment.
And I meant it. I still do. I'm trying to ask you, if you can only die on one hill, but you choose to defend them all, how is that possible? That might be why you I don't know, split your conscience. Are you following me here?
I'm not sure. Are you talking like maybe multiple personalities or?
No. Sorry. Touchy subject. I mean, it's a defense mechanism. It doesn't have to be a whole other person.
It sounds like you've dealt with this sort of thing before. So, if you don't mind me asking, again, how do I get things under control without a crutch?
It is a good question. With the same type of intense training that put the mechanism there in the first place, except there's no violence, much more guidance, perhaps some medication.
No need for that. My body is a temple.
This again. Okay. Look, your mind is under such turmoil that the temple needs extra support, the crutch you speak of. So, as someone of such profound conviction, your words, not mine, are you willing to build a stronger temple?
Will it help me sleep? Like, really sleep like everyone else?
I don't make guarantees, but I'll do my best.
Then I look forward to the possibility of rest. In the interim, I will hope that I continue to be positively productive in the event of an unconscious effort on my part. So are you going to help him sleep better? Maybe just give him an Ambien?
I'm not a fan of Ambien, but that's part of it. And if that's, I hate to say it this way, but if that's the hook that will allow for all of the other parts to be processed, then so be it. You got to start somewhere.
How about getting him a Tempur-Pedic? I have it, and I swear by it, man. They're fantastic.
Oh, don't get me wrong. We'll talk about all of the benefits of proper sleep hygiene. The warm glass of milk really does help. He needs to turn off all the back computers.
It helps my kid.
I mean, the Batcave itself does seem like it's pretty dark, so I think that's okay. But, Yeah. He really needs to tone down a lot of the other environment so he can get some good sleep. And of course,
well, maybe we can see if Tempur-Pedic can sponsor the show. I know Purple Mattress tends to sponsor most podcasts, but maybe we can get some Tempur-Pedic money.
Gotcha. Hey.
So that's going to wrap things up. This episode turned out to be a little heavier than I think we had anticipated when we initially announced it. But I think it's important for us to remember that the show and pop culture in general doesn't happen in a vacuum, and that for us to attempt to or to imply otherwise does a disservice to what it is that we're trying to do, because this is a mental health show and we need to talk about some real life, real world stressors, and just fucked up right now. There's just no other way to say it.
I got you. Yeah.
So, I mean, we can try and offer some escapism from time to time, but at some point you can't escape reality forever.
Yep.
But if you're looking for some escapism, may we suggest the recommended reading for this week is Batman Knightfall, which the whole story, not just because Knightfall is technically one really long arc encompassing Nightfall, Night Quest, and Night End or Night's End. Jean Paul is the focus of the Night Quest and Night's End. Nightfall is more about Batman and Bane, but you can't really get to the parts with Jean Paul until you get through that. Plus, we referenced Nightfall in the Bane episode. So once again, that's the recommended reading for this week. So coming up, we've got actually guests in back-to-back episodes. So next week is Northstar. And as part of Pride Month, we're covering Northstar, and we're bringing in our good friend Dr. Goku from Guardians MH, a proud Canadian, to help us discuss a Canadian character. And then we are working. We've got it tentatively slated, and hopefully we can officially slot it in. We're going to be talking to Erica Schultz once again on the show, this time about Forgotten Home, which just wrapped up on Comixology. And so we're going to talk to her about that read. I haven't had a chance to read the whole thing yet, but I've read the first couple issues, and it's very interesting, very high fantasy mixed in with some magic stuff, but there's some really human stuff rooted in there. So I really can't wait to dive in now that it's done. I think I was waiting until it was done so I could just binge the whole thing, because I didn't want to have to wait month to month to read everything. So go on Comixology and check that out prior to our episode with her. And then Raphael from Ninja Turtles. So
yeah,
cowabunga dudes. By the way, by the time this episode comes out, go check out the Perfect Package podcast over at p3show.com. Our friends Chad and Dave, always entertaining. And I just did a guest appearance on that show about the perfect summer cookout playlist. So if you're looking for something that's completely just very off-brand for this show, and you want to hear me just cutting loose and talking about crazy relatives having way too much to drink and doing inappropriate things in a cookout and listening to some just classic tunes, check out p3show.com. That episode, like I said, came out, I think, this past Monday as of the release date. So we'll be doing some more stuff with P3 in the future. Just so stay tuned. Check them out. But in the meantime, you can find all of our shows at capesonthecouch.live. Something's going on with the capesonthecouch.com. I have to look into that. But you can always find us definitely capesonthecouch.live. And our Facebook page, our Facebook fan group, our YouTube channel, which is live streaming the recordings of these episodes now. Like I said, we record basically every Saturday night, typically around 8 o'clock. And we're on Twitter, Capes on the Couch, on Instagram, Capes on the Couch. Our email address is capesonthecouch@gmail.com. You can check out our TeePublic site and our Patreon for some additional swag if you wish to purchase some gear and help fund the show so that we can continue to make shows that run the gamut from the super serious like this one to the light and wacky. Anything in between. You never really know what you're going to get. This podcast is like the box of chocolates. There's a bunch of nuts here. And it'll probably help you shit. If you get too much of it, you get diarrhea.
Wow. Okay.
Hey, listen, you make the puns every goddamn week, and
yeah.
I decided to just
All right.
make
Good job.
one.
Good job. Good job. Good job. Okay. Okay.
But, it's been a long... Listen, after everything that this episode started at, we needed some goddamn levity somewhere.
Yes, I agree. All right.
Do you have something you'd like to say before we leave?
I'd like to thank everyone that actually listened to what we said, and everything was absolutely true. As a matter of fact, you could say it was as real as it gets.
Boom. Mic drop. On that note, we're done here. For Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.